Hello soulmate, welcome to another interesting tutorial by Onyx. So for us to make this gown, these are the measurements that we need. We need our shoulder measurements, our bust measurements, right? Shoulder measurement, shoulder to bust, bust circumference, under bust, waist circumference, shoulder to waist, nipple to nipple measurements, and we've mentioned other ones, shoulder to under bust and shoulder to waist. Okay, so those are the measurements that we need, and we are going to be marking the horizontal and vertical lines. Okay, here I've ruled the line. You can see it from here. This is our shoulder line. We have our bust length, we have our under bust, and we have our waistline. There's no need for hip measurement. Okay, so here we have our shoulder divided by 2, and then the shoulder drop down here is 1.5, and the width of our neckline is 3.5. The depth I'm going to connect to 4 inches. You can choose to do as you like, but this is how I'm going to do mine. Okay, so from here I'm connecting at 4 inches. All right, so for our shoulder line, we're going to this is more like a free hand. We're going to be connecting to the bust line. This is just as fast as possible, more like a free hand, right? More like a free hand. So you can do this directly on your fabric and you're good to go. So here I'm going to go in by half an inch or even 3/4, but let's do half an inch. That's at the armhole line, and I'll connect it to the shoulders. And then at this point, I'm going to measure my bust circumference. The bust circumference I'm using here is 30. 30 divided by 4 is 7.5. It's just at this point. Okay, it's just at that point. And we're going to be adding 2 inches. So we'll be connecting this to the 2 inches. Right, so at the under bust, our circumference is 23. So 23 divided by 4, we have it at this point. Okay, now at the waistline, our waist is 24. 24 divided by 4, we have 6 inches. Now for our bust span is going to be divided by 2. Our bust span here is 5 divided by 2, which is 2.5 plus half an inch. Because I said this can be done on your fabric directly, so we are adding this allowance inside the everything. So plus half inch, we have 3, and we're going to be marking the 3 downwards. Okay, and you rule a straight line connecting the lines together. I hope you can see. Let me highlight it. Okay, so what we're going to do now is to tighten the under bust. For us to tighten this under bust, our bust measurement is 30. We're not going to be using much to tighten the under bust. You can do half inch on both sides and it will just be fine. Okay, you can do, let's leave it at half inch. At this point, you want to take half inch on both sides at the waistline. Then we're going to be connecting it to the bust point. Now in this case, we're going to be making use of armhole dart. So we are going to be connecting from the bust points, or we'll move a little up, let's say half inch from the bust point and half inch below the bust point. Whichever way, it still does not matter so long as you can curve it properly. So we're going to be connecting to the middle point of the armhole. Let me take this thing up. right? So connecting to the middle point, right? Now you can tighten the armhole by half an inch or 3/4 of an inch and still connect it to this point. You don't have to make it pointy. So from here, half inch below, we're connecting to the under bust. And at this part too, we're connecting to the under bust. Right? The reason I said either going half or stopping exactly at the under bust, at the bust point, is that we're going to use our curve to blend everything, so it still does not actually matter. If we lose something in between, we can still add the top. So we're just connecting. We can decide to blend it. It will be fine. Okay. And this part too. And we're connecting on a straight line to the waist. Only connecting this part to the waistline. This measurement is quite small for an adult, but it is still okay. So what we're going to do now is to take whatever we have here. Here we have how many inches? 1 inch. So we're going to add that 1 inch back and then add our sewing allowance, right? The 1 inch is added back. Then sewing allowance, you can determine how much sewing allowance you add. So here I'm adding 1.5 1.5 inch for my sewing allowance. Now at this point, I've added a half inch, the sewing allowance already of 2 inches. You can still make it the same instead of having here 1.5 and here 2 inches. Okay, we did not lose so much here. So I'm going to be reducing this to 1 3/4. It will make up for whatever space we have here and also add to ease. So here I'm going to be using 1 3/4 and not 2 inches anymore. So at this point, here we have 1 inch. I'm going to be adding the 1 inch for the dart, which I've taken out from here. And I'm going to be adding again my sewing allowance of 1.5. I hope this is clear. So we're going to be connecting from this line to our bust, under bust, and then to our waistline. So this is what we have for the front. So I'm going to be keeping this aside while we draft the back part. So here we have the back and we're keeping zipper allowance of 1 inch for the back. Okay, zipper allowance 1 inch for the back, and we've measured our bust length for the back, which is 9, and the length here 15. But for the back, we're not going to be making the same, taking the same length with the front. We're going to be minusing 1 inch. Remember, this is freehand sewing, okay, with a little bit of pattern incorporated. Okay, if you do not know how to draft your basic bodice pattern, we have a video on how to draft that. So you go watch the video. The link will be in the description box. And if you think the freehand method is okay for you, you can just go ahead and do it. But I prefer the pattern. I'm just trying to do this the freehand, and I believe it will come out very beautiful. So here we're coming up by 1 inch because the most times the front and back lengths are not on the same line because of the bust at the front. Okay, so at the other pattern, the front pattern, if you notice, we do not have bust that by the bust area. Okay, that is not so necessary in this method. You can just trim this down to the front to make sure that the sides matches together. Okay, so here we'll continue. Our shoulder length measurement divided by 2. The shoulder is 15. Divided by 2, we have 7.5. And the width of our neckline, the same thing we measured at the front, we have 3.5. Okay, now we're coming down by 1 inch for the back, and we are going to connect it. We're connecting it this way. I hope you can see this properly. And then for the back, we're going to be dropping down by 1 inch. We're dropping down on the back shoulder by 1 inch. Remember, the front was 1.5, and here we're doing 1 inch, and that is for a purpose. And that's why I said this is freehand with a little bit of pattern incorporated. All right, so we want to measure what we have as the shoulder width at this point also, so that we can put the two of them together. But it seems the bust measurement and the shoulder measurements are just at the same line. Your measurements might not be the same. This is just a gauged measurement to show you how this was achieved. So we're going to look for the midpoint of this armhole, and we have 4. Okay, you can choose to come in by ½ inch or just take it exactly at that point. Let's just make a little, come in a little, and we're connecting. Remember, we added 1.5 inch at the back or at the front, so here we're adding 1.5 inch, which will serve as the allowance, and we connect our armhole to that area. Okay, now if you're going to be, you can also not use this bust line as your armhole line. You can calculate your armhole by dividing your bust into 12, into 6 rather. Your bust divided by 6 plus 1.5, you use it to get where you're going to be connecting your bust, your armhole length. But here we're making use of the bust, it is still okay. All right, so at this point, which is serving as our waistline, we're going to be imputing our waist measurement, and we're going to be also having that, and we're going to be dividing this into 2 to get our dart line, and we're using ½ inch on both sides. Okay, what do we have here? This is 3. You can decide to extend this to the shoulder line or stop it at the bust line. Let's connect to the bust line first, and then take it down to the shoulder line. So at the bust line we have 3. We're going to be connecting the dart to the bust, and then we take it to the midpoint of the shoulder line. If you take it this way, the slant is going to be quite much, right? We might not take it straight to the midpoint. We can just make it not to be too slanted. So I'm not taking it again to the midpoint, just a little before the midpoint, so that I will not have so much slant at the back. And of course, you can choose to tighten it a bit so that you will not have so much slant behind. So in between here we have a little bit of tightening, which is still okay. You can add it to your measurements if you feel that it's going to affect you. So we're going to be adding back whatever we've taken. Remember, this is where our measurement stops. So we're going to be adding back the 1 inch for the darts, and then add our sewing allowance of 1.5 inch. Okay, this space here, we've already added a sewing allowance. If you feel like this space of 0.25 is, it will mean anything for you, you can still add it back, but it's not going to affect whatever. So we're connecting the lines together, and this is what we have, right? So we're going to be cutting it. Now, one thing you need to understand on this is that if you're going to be making this 6 pieces pattern directly on the fabric, you're not going to be drafting everything together like this. You're going to be drafting them separate, like, you know what you already need to do. Draft one part so that you will have extension to cut for the 6 pieces, after which you place on another to get your actual measurements, and then you have extension of fabric to extend for your 6 pieces gown. All right, I hope you understand. You're not going to be, if you do everything like this on the fabric, there is no way you can cut for the 6 pieces. So you have to draft this part separate, draft this part separate together with the back separately, so that you can cut directly on the 6 pieces. But I prefer to use pattern. If I'm doing this, I'm going to be using pattern, so I can use my paper to place it. Using pattern is not a sign of maturity, it guides you on what you want to do. So I prefer to use pattern than drafting directly on the fabric. But in some cases too, you might choose to do it on your fabric depending on what you are sewing. Okay, so I'm going to be cutting this out and placing the extensions for our 6 pieces. Now, I forgot at this armhole area, remember that whatever you use to tighten your armhole, you're going to be extending it and redrawing your new armhole, so that you don't run shortage of fabric when joining them together. Okay, so here is my new armhole line. While cutting this, now I'm going to be cutting at this part and no longer at the first part. Now, for us to get our 6 pieces, we need to determine the length of the fabric, or the length of the clothes that we want, the length of our dress. Okay, you can measure from the shoulder point, or you measure from the waist what is remaining to complete the length of what you're making. So this is our waistline, and from the waistline here I measured 8 inches. Now, this is just for illustration purpose. Nobody's gown is 8 inches from the waist, except you're making a top. But this is not, you can use this as a blouse, you can use this as a gown. Okay, if you stop it at 8 inches from your waistline, you're making a top, which is okay. If you stop, extend it down to where you want the length of your gown to be, you're probably making a gown. That is very nice. So whatever I have here, I have 8 inch. I'm going to measure the same thing from the edge here. Remember that when cutting on your fabric, this part is going to be on fold. So our, and here is also on fold. Don't mind me, this front is going to be on fold, so there is no extension at the front. The extension for this center front is just going to be by the side. So from this part, I'm going to measure the 8 inches. Now, the 8 inches, you're going to be putting it by the amount of flay that you want. Okay, so from here I measured 3 inches as the amount of flay that I want added to the normal measurement. So from here to that amount of flay that I want, I'll be measuring the same 8 inches. And whatever is left, I'm going to blend it in to my normal measurement. Okay, so I'll be connecting from this part. Look on that design, you can decide to go up from your waist a little, or you can take it from the waistline. The waist is not well fitted, okay, so you can go up a little from the waistline and connect it to this part, or according to what you want, you can take it from the waistline. So here I went up a little from the waistline so that the waist is not too fitted. It depends on what you're seeing and what you want to make. So at this point, this is how I'm going to be cutting and placing on my fabric to cut my 6 pieces gown. So the front part of the gown now, the panel gown, is okay the way it is. Now I will go over to the other side and show you how to do it. Now this is the center back, and I'm still going to measure the same length I want, which is 8 for this paper. Yours can be up to 40, 45, depending on where you want it to be. So I'll measure 8 inches as the length, or let me not mention the number, I'll just mention the length of my fabric. Then I'll measure the width of the flay that I want. Okay, like I said, I'm using 3 inches here. Yours can be 5 inches. It is okay if you use 5 inches, depending on how much you want it to flay. So I'm going to, by the side, for this center back, from the zipper area, I'm going to measure where the 8 inches is going to be stopping, which is here, and I'll still measure the other side where the 8 inches will stop, which is here. So I'm going to be connecting the lines down to where this stops, right? And I measure this other side too. So I'll have to be connecting them together and put this together and this way too. Then this part. Okay, if you notice any sharp points, you blend it. So in essence, what are we saying? Apart from the center front, which is on fold, every other pattern is going to have double of this. All right, like double of the flay this side and this side. So while cutting, we know that each of this is going to have 2 pieces, because this is just a half pattern. So you're going to be folding your fabric into 2 and placing this thing just the same the way it is. So when you cut it, you will now have 2 pieces of fabric that will be joined together. I hope this makes sense to you. So I'm going to do this in all the remaining ones. That is the 2 remaining ones, one for the front and one for the back. And then I'll have to transfer it to my fabric. Now remember, okay, we've added every allowance that we need. So we've added every allowance that we need on the paper. So while cutting on the fabric, there's no need for adding extra allowance. Okay, there's no need for adding another allowance on the fabric if you're following this method. If you're following the main pattern method, you might need to add allowance while cutting on your fabric, because that does not have allowance in it. I hope this makes sense. So I'll show you when I have finished cutting the fabric and joining them together. So here we have the sleeve cutting, and I want to measure the length of the sleeve I want. The sleeve is sectioned into 2 parts. We have the basic sleeve, then before the gathered part. So for the basic sleeve, you have to measure the length of the sleeve from shoulder to the length of the sleeve. Then we're going to measure our cap height. Okay, we're going to measure our cap height. Cap height is gotten by dividing the bust measurement by 12 plus 1. Okay, so whatever your bust measurement is divided by 12, add 1 to it, and that is our cap height. And that is what we are marking. So on this cap height, you insert your round arm measurement. You can use the same measurement you used on your bodice. That will be very perfect. Then insert the base of your sleeve measurements plus your sewing allowance. Okay, so like I said, more like using a free hand after connecting these lines. Okay, let's connect the lines first. Good. So in this case, we're not going to be drawing any structured line. We're just going to be, okay, so we want to add our hemming allowance first. Hemming allowance of 1 inch. I hope you can see that. So at this upper part, we just want to make a free hand movement, and you're going to be drawing more like an S shape. Okay, you need to be careful when doing this so that you don't draw the wrong thing. But it's quite easy to do. Okay, so now we've finished drawing the sleeve measurements. Like if you're a freehand person, you understand what happened. And even if you're using pattern and you're used to it, you equally know that you can do this. Okay, so we'll be cutting it out. And for the lower part of the sleeve, you just have to bear with me. I lost some clips after the making this video, so I do not have the complete um, pattern for the sleeve. But you can make a long strap, a long gathered sleeve, attach a 360 flay to it, then join it to the basic sleeve, and you're good to go. All right, so thank you for watching. Bye.